This episode of Excerpts from Experts is sponsored by Dawn and Sherry Fleming, owners of Valencia Acura. Both Dawn and Sherry have supported Child and Family Center for over 2 decades, and we thank them for their continued support. If you would like to be a sponsor for one of our episodes, email our media team at the email shown on the screen.
Hi everyone, welcome to today's episode. My name is Monica Dede and I'm going to be your host today, and I am here with our guest, Rich Willens, licensed marriage and family therapist. Thank you so much for joining us today, Rich.
Well, you're very welcome.
So today we're actually going to be talking about a pretty difficult topic in regards to death by suicides. So death by suicide is actually the 10th leading cause of death in the U.S., and that equates to about 132 deaths per day by suicide. And there happen to be a lot of myths and misperceptions about suicide. So today I wanted to talk to you about, let's kind of break down what's fact and fiction in regards to what is suicide, why do people have suicidal thoughts. So the first myth that I want to bring up with you is something that's very common, is that if someone threatens suicide, they're more attention seeking. So can you talk about that?
I think from a caregiver perspective, you always wonder, is this genuine or is it not genuine? And so there's a couple things to think about this. One, either way, whether it's attention seeking or genuine, your child is reaching out to you. They are reaching out for emotional needs, for attention, to feel better about themselves, maybe because they're very down. So I think part of it is understanding whether it's attention seeking or not, your child is still reaching out and needs something. They need some nurturance, they need some support. And that doesn't mean that, I understand that caregivers are very busy, especially with the pandemic. You're trying to make ends meet and you're trying to take care of multiple kids and things like that. But if your child is making statements like this, or even, doing some behaviors, that may be related to suicidality, there is a reason for that. So regardless of whether it's attention seeking or not, the first thing to remember is they need some help. They need some support. They are reaching out right now. In terms of what does it mean? Sometimes it is attention seeking. Sometimes they feel like, especially with what we're dealing with the pandemic, they feel like they're not getting enough attention. The world is out of their control. So it could be. It also could be very genuine. It could be that they have some very deep-rooted sadness or anger or things that are causing them to do this. So there's no way to know. It's not like there's any set rule to say, oh yes, this kid is attention seeking and this kid really means it. I think what it really comes back to is really giving them some attention, asking them what's going on. How can I help you? What are your plans today? How can we make sure you're doing things today that take care of yourselves? It's things like that I think you really want to focus on that's most important.
And I think what I'm really hearing you say is that no matter whether it may be an attention-seeking behavior or something more serious where they are considering thoughts and plans of moving forward with suicidal thoughts, is that we want caregivers and parents to take each of these disclosures very seriously and address them with caring and empathy and sympathy and talking to your child about what they really need. And I appreciate you kind of going through the various nuances that may come up when a child or anyone may threaten suicide. I think with going across with that as well, I think there's a fear with parents and caregivers that if my child is saying this, that they must have a mental illness. And that seems to be another misperception in terms of death by suicide, is that only individuals with mental illness can become suicidal. Can you address that topic?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that there's such a belief that, my child is not crazy. There's nothing wrong with my child. As you say, only people, who really have serious mental problems are the ones who want to kill themselves. And that's not necessarily true. I mean, don't get me wrong. Obviously, some people with severe mental problems do suicidality. But look at the world we're in right now. Things are totally overwhelming. Kids are doing online schooling. Kids and parents are home all the time. They can't go and hang out with their friends. It is a very overwhelming time. And socialization is such a big part of kids' life, whether you're a kid or a teenager growing up, that the world feels very out of control. So it is very common with everything going on right now that kids can't have overwhelming feelings. Now, that doesn't mean every kid who's overwhelmed will be suicidal, but it does mean that kids who do not have serious mental health issues could be very overwhelmed, and they may have some thoughts about that. they certainly might have some friends who have had some thoughts like that. They may have seen it on TV or heard about it on the news, or it's out there. I mean, a lot of teenagers talk about it, let's be honest, and even some kids talk about it. So it definitely is out there. So it also could be kind of a learned behavior as a coping skill. And some kids are like, gosh, I just can't handle this anymore. I want out. I want to break from everything. And so they think, what if I were to just end my life? What if this were all be over and I could finally just take a breath and relax? So yeah, a lot of times kids and teens get very overwhelmed and they might think about things like this, and that does not mean that they have severe mental health problems.
Yeah, and I like what you're saying, and when we talk about suicide, it's not necessarily wanting to end their lives, it's more wanting to escape the painful situation that they're in. And kind of, in looking at that, and something that we're seeing in our schools right now are high instances of self-harming behaviors like cutting. And I think that behavior is also very confusing for parents and caregivers. And oftentimes we see that if a child is cutting, the automatic thought is that they're suicidal. What are your thoughts on that?
Cutting and other self-harm behaviors does not mean someone is trying to take their own life. Doesn't mean it might not be that. Sure, it could be that. But, kids, whether they're cutting, whether they're burning themselves, even headbanging, which you see a little bit more with boys versus girls, kids who do these things doesn't necessarily mean they're trying to kill themselves, but it does mean they're trying to hurt themselves. And there is a difference sometimes, and you have to understand the balance between the two. And how do you understand the balance? You talk to your child. To try and figure out what's going on with them, to try and figure out how to support them. A lot of times the self-harm behaviors are not an attempt to end their life, but are an attempt to make the pain go away. They're trying to make the pain go away, whether it's by creating a physical pain so they can forget or stuff down that emotional pain. It could just be something they don't know what else to do. Or again, it could be a learned behavior. It's very common. There are cutting clubs out there with kids at schools and things like that. And so a lot of their friends may have done things like this. They may have said, yeah, I cut myself and it felt better and I didn't think about whatever was bothering me. So just because they are engaging in cutting or some sort of self-harm doesn't mean they're trying to hurt themselves or really kill themselves. It means they're trying to make the pain go away. But regardless, if you find out your child is trying to hurt themselves, it's most important that you talk to them, support them, and then talk to them and see if they want to talk to someone else. Do they need help? Do they need therapy services or some sort of mental health services? Again, it doesn't mean they're crazy. It just means they're in a lot of pain right now and they're overwhelmed.
And I think that's really the key takeaway there, is that if anyone is self-harming, that they're in a lot of pain, and that self-harming act is typically, it's actually a coping skill. It's not a great coping skill, right? Because it's causing harm to themselves, but the act in itself is a way to take away that pain. Mm-hmm. And in talking about that as well, another myth that comes up when we're talking about suicide is that there are no warning signs. It can happen very quickly. Can you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, for kids and adolescents who really have made the decision or who really want to make an attempt, more often than not, those are not the ones where it would be attention seeking, meaning that you probably wouldn't see it coming. They're not going to ask for help. Those are the kids who, instead of cutting on their wrists or somewhere visible, might cut on their stomach or inner thighs where you might not see it. Those are the types of kids or teenagers where, their behaviors might start changing very subtly. So that's where it's really important to know your kid and really be observant of when they start to change. So what could that look like? It could be they start to isolate more. It could be they start to be in the room more. They're not talking to their friends as much. It could be that there's just a change in their mood. They go from either being really sad or really angry to just flat, where you don't see any emotion from them at all. Sometimes, sadly, it goes the opposite, and this is what makes it really hard. Sometimes once they made that decision to try and really kill themselves, there's sort of a relief that comes over them. And so sometimes they present like they're in a better mood. It seems like they're more relaxed, less isolated, less stressed. Again, every kid and teenager is different. Every person is different. So it makes it very, very hard. But again, it all comes back to knowing your child and knowing when there is a change, whether it seems positive or negative on the outside, and talking to them, spending time with them, asking them questions, and really trying to find out what's going on inside their heart and in their head.
That's so important. And I think that really speaks to the final myth that we're going to talk about today, is that talking about suicide will actually encourage that behavior. And this is a really big myth that we want to dismantle today.
Yeah, there's so many people that they say, I don't want to talk to my kid about suicide because then I might put that idea in their head, or they might think, oh yeah, I should do that. I mean, here's the thing. If your child is thinking about cutting or sadly going as far as they want to try and actually kill themselves, they're going to do that. And they've already had that idea in your head long before you've talked about it. I've not worked with one client ever, nor have I ever read any articles or studies that have said that parents have talked to their kids about self-harm or suicide and the kids have gone right out and cut themselves or try and kill themselves after. I've never experienced that. The reality is they're either thinking it or they're not. And as I've talked about in a couple of these questions, what is most important is that you talk to your child and spend time with your child. They clearly have a lot of pain inside. And that doesn't mean they're going to want to just spit it out and start talking to you right away. It doesn't. But just you taking the time to show that you love them, that you care about them, that you have an interest in them, and that you've noticed, by the way, that something's going on with them. You know, that they've seemed more isolated, or there's been a behavior change, or you really feel like something's going on. That will really make them feel understood a little bit and loved a little bit and cared for and a little bit important, because probably they're feeling very overwhelmed and very out of control, and they probably feel very unimportant. And so just you taking the time to ask about it will actually not trigger them to try and cut themselves or hurt themselves. It really will help them feel a little more secure to where they might really share with you what's really going on.
You know, I really appreciate you bringing light to such a difficult topic to talk about. No one wants to talk about suicide or death. But again, as you've been said throughout this entire interview today, the key aspect here is to actually start that conversation. Talk to your child. If you're noticing sudden changes in behaviors or any type of alarming shift, having that conversation is going to be the best preventative option that you have. And then that will allow additional conversations to see, do I need to seek help? You know, whether that be through mental health services, whether it be through community services, the churches, synagogues, all of our community resources that we have. So I appreciate you talking about this topic. Any other final thoughts you'd like to share with us?
No, I think the most important thing is don't be afraid of your child's overwhelming feelings, you know, and understand that they're overwhelmed and they don't know what to do. So they need your support to be able to figure out where to go and have some direction to be able to manage this.
Thank you so much, Rich. Before we go, I just want to include the suicide prevention hotline for anyone who may need to talk to someone immediately. The number is 1-800-273-8255, or you could always text the word home to 741-741. Thank you all for participating in this. I hope this conversation could save a life. And again, the key takeaway is start the conversation. Don't be afraid. Talk to your child and validate your child. So thank you so much, Rich, for joining us today. Have a great one, everyone.